The core part is that a lot of people, they don't know what they don't know, right? In this case, what are the risks of AI? It does require a pretty deep background, understanding the technological side, the legal side, a lot of ethical questions involved, all the cyber and privacy risks around that. Those are all the types of risks that we can really recommend. The whole goal of our platform is really to say, we're going to monitor what's happening externally and tell you about that.
If you're like me or most of our listeners, you have some investment in artificial intelligence and you're either in the DC area or interested in what's happening here. And like most of us, you probably try to keep up with the latest AI reports, the latest AI models. And one of those reports was a Stanford 456-page report that was dropped earlier in April talking about the state of AI in 2025. Again, if you're like most of us, you're interested in that, but you probably don't have time to read the entire 456-page document. That's why today I am so excited to have people who have not only broken down responsible AI governance into their company's concept, but also will help us understand the responsible AI governance part of this very important document. We have two employees from Trustible, which is an AI startup in DC. And for exactly what they do and the positive impact they're making, I'll leave it to the episode. Let's get going. Welcome back to DC Decoded, where we break down what happens when artificial intelligence meets the nation's capital. I'm your host, Sam Lee. Today, we have two employees of Trustible with us to break down the latest happening in AI and how that affects the DC community. Specifically, we'll be looking at the 2025 AI Index report released by Stanford just a few weeks ago. Trustible is a DC-based AI governance software company focused on helping organizations manage and mitigate AI risk, build trust, and accelerate responsible AI development. First up, we have Andrew Gamino Chong. Andrew is the co-founder and chief technology officer of Trustible. Prior to Trustible, Andrew spent 7.5 years at FiscalNote in a variety of software engineer, tech lead, and engineering director roles where he helped FiscalNote build proprietary data ingestion systems, scalable search infrastructure, and a collaborative machine learning platform. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And returning to the show is John Hopkins Gillespie, the guest from a previous episode. John is still the Director of Policy and Product Counsel at Trustible, advising the company on AI regulatory developments and overseeing legal compliance issues for the Trustible platform. I'll leave the rest of his bio for that previous episode, so please go check it out. John, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. Glad to know that I am still the Director of Policy at Trustible.
For now, just keeping everyone updated. All right. So for those who might not know, Andrew, why did you co-found Trustible with the current CEO? Tell us a bit about how this company came to be.
Yeah. So honestly, my background has always been working at the intersection of AI and policy. I actually went to undergrad thinking I wanted to become a lawyer working on technological issues, but I ended up liking the coding side of it a little bit more, but always thinking about how does AI intersect with the law and things like that? So FiscalNote really was the perfect place. I was already in school in DC, wanted to join a startup, having done some internships in big tech. And so that was the perfect thing because we were literally applying AI to analyze what legislation and regulations were the most relevant for different customers, relevant for different issues, trying to really understand and parse through then also, can you detect from the text of something whether it's likely to pass? Is there signal inside of that? Can you look at networks of things like that? Because of that work, and I did some time doing some research in grad school as well, very focused still on using AI to analyze policy, legislation, regulations. I joke that because of that work, one of the test cases in FiscalNote's platform was literally legislation on AI. I was always curious. I'm like, hey, if this ever came up, I was having free reign with what I was doing. I could build models, deploy them, not a lot of documentation. It was all fun and innovation, while every IT and security thing was, compliance up the wazoo. And so I remember reading, I think it was maybe May or June of 2021, I actually saw the EU's proposed AI Act come through. This was several years before it was being proposed. And I remember reading through it and immediately I'm like, man, if this ever became law, this would be a pain in the ass to comply with for a couple of reasons. Actually, while it was a law governing AI, it wasn't actually governing the models. It was governing, I say, the people and the processes you use to develop AI. It's saying there's some people who are AI deployers, and the use cases of AI will be regulated or not. But I was sitting over here like, we don't have a database of our AI use cases. How am I going to convince my legal team that doesn't understand anything that we're only doing low risk AI? So thinking about that problem for a long time. And then, my co-founder and I were talking about it for quite a while. He was the general manager of our Fiscal Notes AI line of business. And I remember we were on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange at Fiscal Notes IPO in 2022. And we basically decided there to commit to doing this. And so, we committed, founded the company beginning of 2023, and it's been fun ever since.
Yeah. And John, why hop aboard Trustible? What drew you to the company?
Yeah. So, Andrew definitely found a nobler cause than going to law school. I did not. And so I ended up graduating from Georgetown and going right into firm life. And while I was working at my first firm, I really got into AI policy and the implications it had for our clients, mostly telecommunications clients. And then I moved over to Alston & Bird and was doing incident response work. And, firm life is great for some. I was looking for something that was a little bit more purposeful in my life. And I happened to find Trustible and applied because the director of policy job was not only something that, at least based on the job description, I'd done before in terms of tracking regulatory developments with AI, and then also explaining, the trajectory of where these laws might go and what implications they might have for customers or clients. But it just sounded like a really exciting opportunity to get on the ground floor of a startup in a space that's still evolving, right? We talk about it now like it's, ancient history, but things are changing. And once we start talking about the report, it's actually really crazy how, even though this report was reflecting on things that were happening in 2024, the world is completely different today from what is being reflected in the report. So, to be on the ground floor and to start at a startup, it's been a great decision. It's probably one of the best decisions I've made professionally in a really long time. We have a really great team. I enjoy it and, keep plugging away.
Yeah, there's a pitch for startups for any lawyers who are in big law and trying to find something different. So there we go. All right, let's get into this report then. So in early April, the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence releases their 2025 AI Index report. It's their 8th edition of this report. They release one every year. And it's a 456-page report that covers AI's expanded role in any sector you could think of: business, policymaking, public life, you name it. And chapter 4 is all about responsible AI governance, which is very relevant to the work that companies like Trustible do. And it's so relevant that Trustible CEO and co-founder Gerald Kiris-Itoros posted on LinkedIn summarizing the AI governance chapter. And there are a few points here that I think are worth just getting your guys' thoughts on. So let's start with benchmarks. So one point of this chapter is that responsible AI benchmarks are emerging, essentially evaluating AI systems against any RAI, responsible AI standards. It still remains uncommon, but new benchmarks such as Helm Safety, AirBench are helping close this gap. Andrew, what is this obsession with benchmarks, and is it actually helpful for responsible AI?
This era of LLMs, AI research had become really obsessed with what I know others call scoreboarding of things, right? It's really great when you can build a new model, run a thing, and then you see if you got the high score. It feels a little bit like someone's playing a video game. And so all the research is attracted to that. It also sometimes gives you actually the potential for training objectives as well, right? You can say, oh yeah, fine tune yourself against this corpus of some stuff like that. It gives a great number. It's great for marketing materials. And I think there's a lot of value for that. Now, the downsides is that, there can be a lot of cheating on these things. If you throw in the benchmark as part of the training data set or you're fine tuning on it, there's not good standards or visibilities or controls around this stuff. So that's definitely one of the concerns with this approach. And then the second is that there's other human qualities that aren't always captured around this. I think that's one of the big flaws. A paper I actually worked on in grad school was looking at similar trends with topic modeling and how actually everyone is now obsessed with just calculating these scores to assess the quality. And the rationale for that was that there was a study 15 years before that showed that there was a correlation, not like a strong correlation, but a mild correlation between human evaluations of things and these scores. And so I think it's important to have benchmarks, to have something you can run automatically, but they should never be the only thing that you do. There needs to be other kinds of human verification steps. People need to understand what is guaranteed or not. And then actually, I think the report did a really good job pointing out that sometimes it's not just about which benchmarks were run, but also which ones weren't or weren't disclosed. Sometimes there's more telling in what wasn't disclosed than what was, because you can see a list of 100 things, the scores look great, but did it actually perform really poorly on the additional 20? That's where the risks might actually be.
Right. John, any additional thoughts there on benchmarks?
Andrew's the technical brain on this one, but I think, when we think about it from a regulatory perspective, right, like we really don't want policymakers getting in the weeds on, what qualifies as a good performance evaluation or benchmark, right? I would say that when it comes to these things, really leave it to the folks that are on the ground that understand the stuff inside and out and take a high level approach. And generally we see that with frameworks, but there are a couple out there that try to prescribe some specific benchmarks to, performance levels and things that would qualify as biased versus not biased. And, my personal advice, and you take this with a grain of salt, but when it comes to, trying to hash these things out legislatively or in the regulatory process, being more high level really makes a lot more sense, and let the experts figure out, exactly what that's going to look like on the technical side. These things change from year to year. What could be biased in fairness now may not be the same thing in a couple of years. So we really don't want to impose strict standards when it comes to benchmarks in the regulatory process.
Well, I think one area that has been pretty relevant in the policymaking space, both here and abroad, are data privacy laws. Like, how do users continue to maintain privacy, both at a personal level, but also a business level, as these AI models continue to evolve and get better? And I know, John, we've talked about how sometimes data privacy laws, specifically from bodies like the European Union, can put up barriers to new entries and kind of cut off innovation in a way from smaller AI players. So can you explain from your vantage point what you see these current data privacy laws being as a tool for good and maybe as a tool for not so good things as well?
Yeah, so I think, the dream of data privacy, right, is to put control of data back into the consumer's hands. And I think what we've seen with these regimes over time is that it ends up being a check the box exercise for companies to go through and say, well, we've done X, Y, and Z, and so we're good and clean. And it doesn't actually drive to the spirit of what the law was intended to do, which was to, again, help empower consumers with their data, understand the data flows, understand how it's being used and collected and shared. And so you're absolutely right. Data laws do put barriers in place for new entrants that want to be able to collect large data sets and then train AI models on them. It imposes a huge cost because compliance with just GDPR alone can, depending on the size of the data sets and what you're processing, it can be astronomical. I would say that the other thing is we've entered into a world where these regimes are just so fractured, right? Here in the US, right, we have, I think, just under 20 different privacy laws. And it's really now just a race to put your own personal stamp on what you value in terms of like data and, what companies should be doing. And so it's really become much more political than it should be. Again, the ultimate intent was supposed to be about consumers. And now we've entered into this world where these data privacy regimes are really kind of chokeholding innovation. The final point I'll actually make is that there's an inherent tension between data privacy laws and being able to innovate and be responsible with AI, right? You want high quality data sets for AI to train, to fine tune, but data privacy laws put a lot of restrictions on GDPR coming to mind first and foremost, put a lot of restrictions on how data can be used. You have to have a certain purpose being able to use the data, some kind of lawful purpose to use the data. There's data minimization periods where, you can only keep the data for a specific purpose for so long and then you have to delete it. And so that really just comes directly in conflict with being able to have high quality data sets that you can maintain for periods of times that are necessary to make sure that the AI system is doing what it needs to do. So as we're thinking about AI regulatory schemes, we should really be thinking about how they go hand in hand with data privacy regulatory regimes as well.
Right. And just for those who might not know, can you briefly explain what GDPR is?
Yeah, so GDPR is the General Data Protection Regulation that's imposed in the European Union. It was passed, I believe, in 2018 was when it came into effect. Either 2016 or 2018 it came into effect. And it basically dictates data privacy policy around the world. And that is a whole other podcast for a whole other day.
Right. And it not only affects like European headquartered companies, it affects multinational companies trying to operate in the EU. So that's basically every big US tech company that tries to operate there as well. One last point I wanted to touch on with the report specifically was the problem of data commons shrinking. So one point is that the data commons is rapidly shrinking, meaning that more websites are restricting AI scraping. In fact, restricted data tokens rose from about 6% to 20 to 33% in 2024, challenging things like AI model diversity and scalability. Andrew, talk a bit about what that actually means and why people should care about that.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember writing about this in, I think, the first newsletter edition that Trustible ever put out. Because we were seeing that as well, namely that more and more paywalls were popping up. A lot of orgs were realizing that before there was basically a mutual incentive to allow your pages to be scraped, right? Because that's how you get into search indexes. That's how people discover your site. You got traffic, led to ad revenue. So there was a mutually beneficial experience. However, the new AI-driven search engines and platforms, they're not driving web traffic to you. And so it's actually now suddenly a much more one-sided advantage system. So plenty of orgs are like, well, content is my whole game here. They actually realize that the quality of their content, any place that basically is building a business on the quality of their content, not the quantity, suddenly has a lot of incentives to protect that as heavily as possible and to switch over to subscription models, push back against that scraping. In all fairness, many of them are making direct deals with the big players, because that's, again, how you can create this symbiotic relationship between something. But I do think we're going to see almost every website that has a lot of stuff, whether it's user-generated things like Reddit or high-quality content from good quality publishers, they're all going to be blocking this kind of access. Now, the unintended side effect of that is that there are some groups and websites out there that have an incentive to get AI to pick up their stuff. There's a great report about the Pravda network. It's a network of Russian propaganda websites and outlets, oftentimes masquerading as if they're US journalistic outputs. They're not putting up any anti-scraping technology. They want to get scraped, right? There's plenty of places where we talk about the risk of data poisoning of models or of influence poisoning of these models, trying to compete ideologically for what comes out of these things, and affecting the raw training data or the sources that they go out to when searching is a key way to do that. And so I worry over time there's going to be the self-selection. All the groups who want data to be collected will be out there. There's obviously problems as well with model collapse, or if you're scraping a lot of AI-generated stuff itself, that can lead to actually unintended degradation of model performance. And so I think there's some weird effects that could happen out in the ecosystem, which is why we may have already scraped the majority of the data that we'll have for LLMs going forward.
Switching gears, I understand Trustible recently launched version 2.0 of its model transparency ratings, which is great to hear. Andrew, could we start with you, and could you walk us through what these ratings are and what's new in this version?
Yeah, so we've heard a lot of our customers are oftentimes the non-technical leaders of AI governance at large regulated enterprises, head of compliance, legal teams and whatnot. They still need to be involved with a lot of what's going on, including deciding what models to use. However, right now, they don't have access to actually understand what's going into these models. Most transparency right now are high-level model cards that are geared towards a very technical audience, or sometimes these 50-page long safety or technical reports that you basically need a graduate degree in computer science to understand and read, right? And then, like I said before, sometimes it's what's not in there that is the most relevant part. So our team is actually going through and we're reading through all of them. We're going through line by line. We've built up our own criteria, heavily informed right now by two different laws, the EU AI Act General Purpose AI Transparency Requirements, and actually a California Data Transparency Act that John can talk a little bit more about. And we're basically going through and we are creating an editorial opinion on, are they disclosing enough to meet at least the spirit of the law on this? Is there enough information where a risk or compliance person could understand the limitations of using this model, or they're building on this could pass on certain risks? So the whole idea is, can we inform the risk element during model selection?
Awesome. Yeah, John, can you talk a bit about how the existing law infrastructures help create this type of rating system that Trustible uses for obviously itself, but also for its customers?
Yeah, so I think, at least in the US, and I mean, to some degree in the EU, though, it's a bit more complicated, right? The baseline for trying to understand, what models are being used or what models are being deployed into the ecosystem is some level of transparency. And Andrew's completely right. The information that the model providers put out is extremely technical. And so if you're a legal persona, a la someone like me, who's trying to understand, in a company, what is going to be the best model to be used for a given product or service to underpin it, right? It's going to be, unless you have a technical background and you went to law school, it's going to be really difficult to parse through a lot of this information and understand the robustness of the model, the security requirements that have gone into the model, all of these, different things that, as a due diligence persona, that's what you'd want to do, right? Is understand, what exactly are the risks that are going to be interjected into your product or service if you use a particular model. And so the thing about the model transparency ratings is it gives a really easy way for someone to evaluate whether or not a model has a high or low level of transparency when it comes to some of these key requirements that we look at. So, again, I may be biased on this one, but I have found the ratings personally helpful in trying to navigate some of the more technical complexities of these models, because it really does break it down in a way that is digestible for all types of personas, across the AI governance space.
Right. And what's the biggest difference with 2.0 compared to 1.0? What have you guys tried to upgrade the most on?
We expanded the set of categories we were covering, partly because of the new California law. Before, we were only really looking at some of the evaluations if we thought the model fell into this additional category under the AI Act, which are models with systemic risk. But now we've expanded that just to start summarizing the evaluation activities of other models. And then we also refined our criteria, built up a bit more of a process so we can ingest them faster. So we built up some internal tooling to help us build that. But really the whole idea is actually we're starting to now recommend for specific use cases which models might be the most appropriate. We can now say, for example, if you're doing something in education, this model over here examined for potentially toxic content and filtered it out, versus this other model didn't, because they're actually using it to build content filters for toxicity. And so you need that information in there. Those are sometimes the differences you might want to consider. Or similarly, we're trying to evaluate in more nuance now, if there's specialized data processing rules, whether that could trigger additional risks related to data processing or anonymization of data, for example. So it's all really in response to what are the concerns our customers have, what are they looking for during their model selection considerations, and how can we make it so you can easily see that single, simple language in a single accessible place.
Right. And on the topic of transparency, that was actually a point of tension between Trustible and the AI report. The AI report had talked about how transparency and foundation AI research has improved according to their research, where transparency scores for foundation models rose from about 37% to 58% in 2024. And then Trustible noted that it's counter to Trustible's research that it has done on AI model transparency ratings, where they've seen, or you guys have seen, transparency go down. So why the discrepancy? Either of you?
Yeah, we really focus on a lot of the commercial models because those are the ones our customers use. A number of the models in the Stanford report are also some of the ones that academia uses heavily. And obviously, it's very important for those to have a lot more information out there. And I think there has been an improvement there. We've really been focused on what's been happening in the successive generations of models from definitely the big players. It's been hard to track all of the OpenAI releases lately because it went from 01 to 04 to 03 to 4.5 to 4.1 to 04 mini. Each of those successive things, actually, we're seeing they were disclosing less and less. That's continuing a trend where GPT-2 was fully open, a lot of information, 3.5, less and less. Same thing even with Anthropic. Now, to your point about the average scores going up, even though we're seeing the trends go down, again, maybe highlights one of the challenges with an aggregate score. Include more models, include a lot of academic things. Yes, some players were doing a great job. And some groups like Cohere for AI often does very well in our ratings because they are very transparent about some stuff. We do have a couple of things. One of the highest rating models is actually what Snowflake built with Arctic for their customers. I don't think that was included in that Helm index. And then also it's informed by which criteria we're selecting. We're really viewing it from the lens of what's in the laws and what do businesses know and care about, rather than just the tradition necessarily on the academic side.
John, anything to add on that point?
Andrew said it beautifully.
Agreed. And I also know that Trustible had a presence at the International Association of Privacy Professionals, or IAPP, Global Privacy Summit that happened just last week in DC. You guys gave live demos of Trustable's responsible AI governance platform. I'm curious, like in person, what kind of response did you receive from attendees? What did they like? Were they confused about? I'm curious, like what was their response?
You want to start, John?
Yeah, I can. I think one of the biggest takeaways from the conference was that we are still really in such an infant phase when it comes to AI governance, and that the folks that we were talking to on the ground are being charged with, AI governance generally, but it's still being run by committee. It might not sit with the right teams, and so they're trying to reshuffle and reappropriate it to a different team that may be more appropriate. And I think that actually is reflected too in the report. I think the Stanford report mentioned that it's kind of all over the place with who's responsible for AI governance. So we heard a lot of folks come by who were very interested in, the ability to be able to succinctly, intake and assess use cases, inventorize them in a very clean way, and then also assess their policies, against existing standards and frameworks. I think that was something that was very attractive because, a lot of the work is still kind of up in the air for a lot of these companies. They're trying to get a grip around what does it mean to responsibly govern these systems. And they're just having a hard time tracking down where AI exists within the company, which I think can segue very neatly into our other product launch, which is our use case templates, which I'll give a quick plug for because this was something that I worked on and, kind of speaks to the pain point that customers are feeling right now, which is trying to get a grip around, where AI is being used. And so the premise of the use case templates is to take the top, for the moment, the top use cases that are being deployed in, organizations, whether it be search and retrieval systems or machine translation or customer facing chatbots, right? And have documentation ready for the customers when they get into the platform where they can just go in, assess, what risks we've already identified that come with these systems, what stakeholders come with these systems, what are the benefits, what are some of the mitigations that come with these systems? It's all right there for them. And so with just a few clicks of a button, they can review the information that we've put into the use case and it's created for them. And that significantly cuts down on the time that, personas across organizations are spending on trying to understand what documentation they need for these systems. Are these high risks? Are they low risk? How do we get this approved? It really cuts down on that timeline. And so, I think from the value that we're offering there is just tremendous because it's really helping to accelerate AI adoption across the organizations. And then they can spend time looking at some of these higher risk use cases.
Yeah, great segue, John. I'm curious, Andrew, how long did the use case templates library, how long did it take to go from conception, ideation to execution? What was that timeline for you guys?
It's been something we've been talking about for a while, really from ideation to end, probably just a little over 2 months plus some change from when we really began working on it. Part of it was a discussion from ourselves, some research on what we want to include in the initial launch, the right structuring about it. John did a lot of research on what are the appropriate controls for each one, really balancing though out kind of the innovation and speed with what's really happening. We do a lot of work and we love to collaborate with the team at the AI incident database. So everything that we're doing in terms of risks is always informed very much like what has gone wrong in a pragmatic sense. And so really it was a good discussion. We went through each one saying, all right, what are the key couple ways the system can go wrong? What are the types of harms? What are the ways to mitigate those? And also providing some of the right documentation to help get that accelerated. Then thinking and really building up a good structure and some internal processes and tools for building this out. Because the big thing we want to do going forward is obviously adding a lot more use case templates, different sectors, different areas to really just accelerate that process. To go back to what we heard at IAPP a little bit, the space is changing very quickly. Some people, they said no to some use cases last year because the models weren't good enough. But now they've got advanced reasoning models that can do that. But also they said yes to something before, but now that system can independently search the internet. Like, wait a minute, that changes all of the risks heavily. And we're not even talking about AI agents yet, right? The idea that you're no longer just doing a read-only RAG pattern pulling in data, now you're acting on it, right? And there's been a lot of research on how to improve this, but also a lot of research already on all of the security risks that it implements. And so I think it's going to be a very active space, and keeping on top of it. We're ready for it. We've got the expertise. It's very challenging for a lot of people who also have all of their other work they need to do to stay on top of that. So that's, again, why we're building things like these templates to help them get ahead of that.
And that's the most, I think, important part to remember about any sort of AI development, whether it's responsible AI or a policy, what have you. The only constant is change right now. And as the AI space continues to grow, I've been talking to more startup founders and leaders in the DC area who are creating these responsible AI software and governance tools. For example, I just put out an episode with Juan Manuel Contreras, who runs a startup called Aymara that helps developers build responsible AI tools based on customer needs. So if I'm a customer, particularly an enterprise customer, why would I choose Trustible? In other words, what do you think is Trustable's biggest value add for customers who are interested in deploying responsible AI software? Maybe we can do John and then Andrew.
Oh, no, I think we should do it the other way around. This is Andrew.
Okay, Andrew then John. Andrew then John.
Bread and butter right here. You can't do that.
I'll talk on the business side. John can obviously handle for the regulatory and the risk side. So the core part is that a lot of people, they don't know what they don't know, right? In this case, what are the risks of AI? It does require a pretty deep background, understanding the technological side, the legal side, a lot of ethical questions involved, all the cyber and privacy risks around that. Those are all the types of risks that we can really recommend. The whole goal of our platform is really to say, we're going to monitor what's happening externally and tell you about that. We say AI governance is hard because you've got this growth inside your org on two different dimensions. There's the internal complexity. So how many AI use cases you have, the models, how long they've been running, all of the people you have working on this stuff, that's going up. But then the external context is also increasing. That's the number of regulations, all of your customers asking stuff, all of the research about AI risks and the different models and incidents that are happening. So how do you keep up with both of those? And if both are growing, then you actually have an exponential problem. So Trustible is what helps you deal with that in a non-linear, non-exponential way, because we're tracking everything that's happening externally. Which models are riskier? What incidents are happening? What risks you need to be aware of? What are the use cases? How do you measure the value of those? We give you that all to you out of the box. We use a little bit of AI, we use some automation, we integrate to help deliver that to you at scale so that you can stay both present with all of the research and help you scale with that into the future as you adopt more AI.
Awesome. John?
Yeah, I think our biggest value, honestly, is the insights that we have throughout the platform. I think that is a key distinguisher because this work is difficult, right? In any type of compliance space, it can be time consuming. It is costly. It involves a lot of people. It involves a lot of teamwork. It involves a lot of approval. And, along the way, you're going to have questions. It's not going to be, as Andrew was saying, it's not linear. There's no one way to slice this baby. And so, the thing that we bake into the platform is making sure that not only customers are checking the box when it comes to complying with frameworks, cross-functionally, but it is making sure that they have the appropriate level of guidance that they need to understand the task at hand and to actually think through some of the questions. Again, as, someone in my position as a lawyer, right? I'm looking at this platform and I'm thinking, I've now been tasked, right, at my company with AI governance. And I really don't know what that means because that's not what I've been doing for the last 7 years. And I have a platform where I'm working through some of these really difficult questions about, documentation and, data requirements and system requirements. And every step along the way, there is guidance that's helping me understand, what exactly needs to be inputted, who should I be asking, and what's going to make a good comprehensive answer. Like Andrew said, we sprinkle some AI throughout, and I think that insight with the level of automation that we have really helps personas that are working through the platform understand what they're doing and get to the desired outcome, which is either approval, denial, and they can get their products to market.
It's not uncommon. I was going to say, it's not uncommon for us to come into a customer and they're emailing back and forth a Word document to try and understand the system between their ML engineers and their legal team. And it's taking them a better part of 6 to 8 weeks to even do a review of this.
Sure.
We get that down to under a week because of our automation and workflows and all that recommendations. And that becomes then a game changer. It's really an order of magnitude more speed and efficiency for AI governance.
Right. And that's, I think, what everybody wants, no matter where they come from. To close out, 2 quick questions for you guys. We'll go one by one. But first question, current most underrated AI trend that you're seeing? We'll go Andrew, then John. We want to keep that.
Underrated AI trend. You mean in terms of technical stuff on the policy side?
It can be whatever you're most comfortable with.
I think a lot of people are obsessed. What I joke on, the big existential risks, the big kind of scary things. But the number one way that you can right now get in big legal trouble, incur big legal fines, is simply over exaggerating the capabilities of your system. Earlier today, the FTC, which right now is composed only right now of Republican commissioners, still levied a pretty serious settlement with Workado because they said, oh, we're 98% accurate. They were like 53% accurate. And so I think people don't realize that you have to be really careful. And if you don't have a pretty good document or test that can back up that number, you can get busted for that outside of any sweeping legislation that's out.
Good to know. John?
Yeah, actually, to kind of go off of what Andrew was talking about with Workado and to kind of touch back on the report, I think one of the things that is thrown around but isn't really fully baked is the concept of incidents. And I say that, having some incident response background where, we talk about when the system goes wrong, but, it's more than just reporting it right now in the AI incident database or in other publicly available databases. It's really thinking about what does meaningful incident response look like and what does it mean to meaningfully give people information when things go wrong. I don't think that we've really thought that through. I think if we look at the example of data incidences and cyber security incidences, we have a really mucked up regime of response work where consumers get notified and you don't even read the notices that you get in the mail because you've gotten 20 of them and you know that forever and eternity you have free credit rating, free credit monitoring, right? And so I really think that one of the underrated things that we're not thinking about is what does meaningful AI incident reporting look like? Because right now it really is, whack-a-mole in terms of regulators kind of paying attention or getting consumer complaints and then going after, somebody that's doing something that they shouldn't be doing. And we should be thinking about this a little bit more holistically, in my opinion.
Right. And then on the flip side, most overrated AI trend. What's something that is currently in conversations that in 5 years will be like, what even was that? Andrew, then John.
Yeah, I do think that AI agents are fun. They're exciting. There's a lot of discussion.
Okay, continue.
I think we're farther away from them being relied upon than people think or expect. They're kind of impressive, maybe we'll call them 80-20 tools. Yeah, you can verify something, you can get some experiments working, but there's a wide range of both understanding and research that needs to happen on the reliability for them. Because, we know how to govern humans. We're still figuring out how to govern AI agents. I think the reliability, people depending on them, is further away than anybody actually thinks.
Got it. John?
So I love innovation, but I think the word is being thrown around so much. The pendulum.
You're going after innovation as a word. Okay.
It is loaded. It is definitely a loaded term. And I certainly have no problem with, people being creative and really trying to, solve problems in a unique way. But I think that we are just being bombarded with the concept of innovation and not thinking about, and I think I talked about this on the last time I was here, right? Like, what are common sense guardrails for the technology, right? It's fine to be creative. It's fine to push boundaries, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But I think at a base level, we do have to just maybe in the group chat bring in, like, what does trustworthiness look like? So that way, we're demonstrating to people that these tools work the way that they're intended, right? It's great if you've got the newest, shiniest thing, but if it's not doing what it's intended to do, if it's not performing the way that it's intended to perform, and it can cause people harm, then it's going to be very quickly not the shiny new thing, and it's going to be a problem. And so, yes, innovation is great, but we need to think about how that's cabined when we're developing these tools. And really, we don't have to go overboard, right? We do not have to swing the pendulum all the way back to this overly cautious prescriptive regulatory regime, right? But there is a balance, and we do need to think about a baseline of what responsible and trustworthy development looks like. So that way we're balancing what can be unleashed with protecting people and companies and, and some of the societal harms that come with AI tools.
Well said. Well, guys, when there's another meaningful AI development or another trustable development, we can continue this conversation. But until then, thanks again, Andrew and John, for your time. You guys are doing great work, and I'm sure our listeners in the DC, Virginia, Maryland community will definitely get some insights from this. So appreciate you guys again for your time.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Sam.
That's a wrap for this episode of DC Decoded. I want to thank Andrew and John again for their time. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to subscribe to DC Decoded on your favorite podcast platform, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. If you found this discussion valuable, we'd love it if you left a rating or review. It helps others discover the show. If you're watching or listening on Substack, consider recommending us. It's free and it'll help other people in your circle discover us, and you can talk about the show with more people in your circle. For more on the DC chapter of the Gen AI Collective, upcoming events, and ways to get involved via collaborations or sponsorships, check out the links in the show description. To learn more about Andrew and John's company, Trustible, visit trustible.ai. That's trustible.ai. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in 2 Wednesdays for the next episode.